So today we're going to start talking about area. We've talked briefly about it when we were doing our coordinate planes and we found the area of things by counting boxes inside. So now we're going to really be using the formula. And we do a lot of things with area. We don't do anything with circles, which will make some of you happy because you don't have to worry about pi and all of that kind of stuff. But the area we're going to be working on is mostly rectangles and triangles and then things that are made up of rectangles and triangles. So really all you have to do is memorize a couple of formulas and then you're going to have it all, you're going to be able to do all of it. So what we're going to do today is just the beginning of it, which I think a lot of it you've probably already done. But bear with me as I talk to you about how I want you to do it, because when we get to the harder ones, if you'll follow my directions, and by now I hope you've learned, if you follow my directions, I give you everything you need to get to the hard stuff. But some of you still kind of choose not to do that. But hopefully you will choose it this time. All right, so area. The formula is the number of square units inside a two-dimensional figure. Okay, so two-dimensional means flat. And so we talked about, when we did this before, we talked about how it's like carpet, what covers the floor, what covers the wall. Area just has to do with what it takes to cover something. And we talked about it, how it is always squared, because it says square units. So it's always squared. So it could be centimeters squared, feet squared, millimeters squared, inches squared, miles squared, blah, blah, blah. Everything's squared. So whenever you see area, you need to think squared. Your answer always needs to have a squared at the end of it, okay? All right. Okay, now, in order to find the area, there are some steps that I want you to take. And I'm very picky about how you do them, and you'll see why as we get to the harder ones. But this is, actually you won't have to do it this way the entire time, but to start with you will. Okay, so first of all, you're going to write down the formula. Your seat's right there in the front. You're going to write down the formula first, okay? The beautiful thing about formulas is that they tell you exactly what to do. That makes them really easy to use. All you have to do is exactly what it says. And that's where some people make their mistakes. They write down the formula, then they don't use it, okay? And I'll talk more about what that means by using it. But the formula tells you what to do, so you don't have to memorize anything. You don't even have to know how to do it. If it tells you a formula, you just do what the formula says. You're going to find the base and the height on each shape. That's going to be an important part of it, identifying which is the base and which is the height. And then plug in the numbers and then solve. So let's go, let's talk about some of these pieces. So I have up here a rectangle and two triangles. Okay, so we're going to use little b to refer to the base, and we're going to use little h to refer to the height. So anytime you have a rectangle or a square, one of them is the base, one of them is the height. And honestly, it really wouldn't matter if we called this one the base and that one the height. Doesn't matter. Means the same thing because the formula says just multiply them together. So if we flip-flop this and you said this was the base and this was the height, it would still be fine. Okay? So base and height, you're just looking for two sides, but they need to come together, and they need to come together at a right angle. That's one of the keys that you're looking for, is the corner makes a right angle. Okay? So in other words, we can't call this one the base and that one the height. That doesn't make sense because that's not next to it. Okay? All right, so on a triangle, this triangle happens to have a line that goes up the middle that makes the height. Here's why. When you go to the doctor and he says, let's measure how tall you are, you don't do this. You don't go sideways, right? Okay, well, we can't use a sideways line to make up our height. It has to be straight up and down. It has to go from the bottom to the top. So there is no line on the side of this triangle that goes straight up and down. You see it? Because that one's curved and that one's not curved, but slanted. And that one's slanted. But the one that goes up the middle is straight up and down. That is measuring how high it is from the bottom to the top. So that's why we have to use this. And just a hint, whenever you see a dashed line, use it. Because almost every time if there's a dashed line, that's your answer. Okay? So that's our height on this one. And then our base, remember, it meets at a right angle. So this one is the base. This one and this one are not the bases. The one at the bottom is the base. Okay? And then this triangle happens to have a right angle. Do you remember what this kind of triangle is called? A cube. I don't hear anybody saying that. Right. It's good. Somebody said it. Right. Yeah, it's a right triangle. Okay, because it has a right angle for its corner. And that means the base is going to be one of them and the height is going to be the other one. And again, it doesn't really matter which one we call the base or the height. Okay, now I want you to highlight this statement right here because it's going to help you in just a minute. It's going to actually make your life so much easier. Ready? It says dividing by 2 and multiplying by 1/2 is the same thing. Highlight that because you're going to be able to use that to help you with some stuff you're going to do. So, for instance, if I said, what's half of 10, you would say
5.
If I said, what is 10 divided by 2, you would say
5.
Do you see how it's the same thing?
Yeah.
So dividing by 2 and multiplying by 1/2, it's the exact same thing. So I'll show you why this is important in just a second. All right. Any questions on what we just talked about before? All right, so you have this foldable, and at the top it has what word? Triangle. And then in the middle it has square, rectangle, parallelogram. And notice that next shape doesn't have a name next to it. We're on the outside of it right now. What's the name of that thing? Anybody know?
Rhombus.
Very good. It's a rhombus. I'm impressed that you knew that. That's a rhombus. Write it in. If you don't know how to spell it, it's RHOMBUS. That's the last shape. Okay? So we have triangle, square, rectangle, parallelogram, rhombus, and the last one is a trapezoid. Okay? But if you open up all 3 flaps at the same time, you will see there are only 3 formulas for us to memorize. That's because 4 of them have the same formula. All the ones that have 4 sides, except a trapezoid, have the same formula. What is it? Who can read it to me? Area equals base times height, which multiply the base and the height. Now, the trapezoid is different because if you'll notice by looking at it, the sides are not the same. You have 2 slanted sides and a base and a height that are different lengths. That's why it has a different formula. But we'll get more to that in a second. So our first one is a triangle. Now look, here's been a problem. When first period was doing this, here's what they did. They would half everything or they would half nothing. The formula for a triangle is 1/2 times the base times the height. 1/2 times the base times the height. That's because it's a triangle. That's the only thing that has that formula is triangle. So it has 1/2 times the base times the height. So our steps said first thing, copy the formula. So on the first line, I want you to write, oops, that is not what I wanted to do. On the first line, I want you to write area equals, A equals 1/2 BH. You're just writing the formula. That's the first step. Okay, and for a little while, we're going to do this every single time until you get it memorized and in your brain. Then I'll let you slack off on writing the formula, but it's going to be a while. So, first step, write the formula. Next, we need to figure out the base and the height on this triangle. Now, there are 4 numbers on that triangle. But we have to figure out which ones we need. In other words, there are extras because we only need a base and a height. So let's talk about, let's talk about first the base. Anybody have any idea which number is the base? Olivia, what do you think? The 12. Okay, tell me why you chose the 12.
It's at the bottom.
All right, because it's at the bottom. What if it had been turned sideways, though? Because it could have been. There's another thing you're looking for. You are correct. That is the base. It is at the bottom, but it doesn't have to be because they could have actually turned this thing like this, and this would be the base. Okay? What other thing are you looking for? What other thing, Autumn?
It's where the line is. It's at the bottom of the line, and you move the triangle.
Because there is a
Right.
because there's a right angle. You're looking for that right angle. Yeah, it's where the bottom of the line is, and that's actually supposed to be a dashed line. But there's also a right angle. We're looking for where the right angle is. So if this is the base, is 4, 4, or 3 the height? 3 is the height. Everybody see it? Because remember, we don't measure it like this. We measure it straight up and down. Okay? So now our next step is to put the base and the height into our formula. So area equals 1/2 times 12 times, what was it, 3? Yeah, 3. Okay? Now, we've plugged in our numbers. You have to do that. You have to write the formula. You have to plug in the numbers. Now, once you do that, though, it's easy. I want you to think about this for just a second. I just told you, we could do some math with fractions and turn everything into a fraction and all of that, but I just told you a shortcut. Multiplying by 1/2 is the same as dividing by 2, right? So what we could do, because we're multiplying everything, we can do it in whatever order we want to. So we could multiply 12 times 3 and then divide it by 2. So 12 times 3 is 36. Divided by 2 is
18.
But there's actually even a shorter way. Here's what I do. When I'm doing this, here's exactly what I do. I go, this number is even, so it's easy for me to find half of it. Half of 12 is 6. 6 times 3 is
18.
And I could do all of that in my head. I didn't need any calculator. I didn't need to write anything down. I could do all of it in my head. Now, if that's too hard for you to remember, then just multiply it all across and you'll be fine. But that's what I usually do. If there's an even number, I just half it. So I take half of 12, 6. 6 times 3 is 18. So our answer is 18. So area equals 18. And remember to label it. They are centimeters, and they are always squared. 18 centimeters squared is our answer. This next flap has to do with anything that is a rectangle. It has to do with a parallelogram, a rhombus, and what other one? Square. So anything with 4 sides where all the sides are the same length, we can use this formula, which is base times height. So the formula is area equals base times height. No halving on this one. So it's just base times height. Now we got to identify the base and the height. Okay, and I want to point out to you that this thing right here, if you can't read it, it says 1 foot. Everything else is given to us in inches. So how many inches is that? 12. 1 foot is 12 inches. So go ahead and write 12 inches on there. Okay? Now, we have to identify the base and the height of this shape. Remember what I told you about dashed lines? Always use them. Because every time it's going to be it. I don't know. There may be a time where it's not. But in my experience. All right. So, what do you think the base of this one is? 12 inches. How about the height?
8 inches.
8 inches. Good. Not 10 because that's slanted. Okay. So, go ahead and write down here. This is going to be our base. It's 12. And over here is our height. I want you to write it on the shape because that's going to help you with some other stuff you're going to be doing when we get to harder ones. Okay. So, remember the formula. Area equals base times height. So, the base was 12. The height was 8. Do we have to divide by 2 here? No, please notice that. It's 4-sided. The formula is base times height. There's no halving. So don't half it. What is 12 times 8? Who knows that?
96.
Very good. 96. And it was given to us in inches, so we have inches squared. And this is the only one that's a little bit tricky, but honestly it's not tricky. It just looks tricky. You look at it and you go, ooh, what is all that? It's all kinds of letters in there, all kinds of stuff. But remember, formula tells you what to do. You don't have to memorize. And actually, on the milestone, and I'll double check this, but I'm pretty sure that at this point they're giving you this formula. So if you see a trapezoid, all you have to do is look back at the formula sheet, and it should be there. So let's write down the formula first thing. So the area equals 1/2 times the what? Height. Good. Parentheses, and then it has base 1 plus base 2. Now, don't worry about base 1 and base 2. All that is that these two bases have different amounts. So we have to add those two together to get our answer. That's all it's saying. So let's plug in the number. Well, first of all, let's identify the number. So the dashed line of 8 centimeters, what does that represent? The height. Good. So you knew this one was the height. Now, this one and this one are the bases. And it does not matter which one we call base 1 and which one we call base 2. Doesn't matter at all. So I'm just going to call this one base 1 and this one base 2. Here's why it doesn't matter, because we're going to add them together anyways, and we can add in any order and we'll still get the right answer. So just one of them is base 1 and one is base 2. So let's plug in our numbers now. So area equals, don't forget your 1/2, times, don't forget the times sign, the height. What is the height? 8. And then parentheses, that means times again. What's base 1?
9.
I made it 9. If you made it 5, it's okay. And then base 2 is 5. 9 plus 5. Then we're going to follow order of operations. What do we do first? Parentheses first. In this case, it does matter what order we go in because we're not just multiplying or just adding. So 8 times 9 plus 5 is? 14. Now we just have multiplying. 1/2 times 8 times 14. Everybody figure out 1/2 times 8 times 14. I'll let you figure it whichever way you want to. What'd you get?
56.
56 centimeters squared.